The royal convoy moved silently through space, its sleek ships gleaming under the light of distant stars. Inside the main vessel, Princess Emma sat straight-backed on her cushioned seat, her silver-scaled skin shimmering as she reviewed diplomatic documents on her holographic display. She was tired of these endless meetings, but as the heir to the Star Empire, she had no choice but to attend. Her guard captain, Robert, stood nearby with perfect posture, his ceremonial armor polished to a mirror shine. The only thing that bothered the princess was the presence of the human military advisor, Jack Stone, who sat quietly in the corner of the room. She didn't understand why her father had insisted on having a human on board. Everyone knew humans were far behind in technology and military tactics. Jack kept his eyes forward, pretending not to notice the occasional glances of doubt from the alien crew. He was used to it after 6 months of serving as an advisor to the Empire. His plain black uniform looked out of place among the advanced armor of the alien guards, but he didn't mind. He had earned his place here through merit, even if most of them didn't believe it. The ship's calm atmosphere shattered when the first explosion hit. The entire vessel shook, and warning lights flashed everywhere. Princess Emma grabbed her seat as her documents scattered across the floor. Before anyone could react, 3 more explosions rocked the ship. Status report. Robert barked into his communication device. His face turned pale as he received the answer. Multiple rebel ships have surrounded us. They've disabled our main engines and weapon systems. Jack was already on his feet, moving to the nearest window. He counted at least 6 rebel ships, all positioned strategically to prevent escape. This was no random attack. Someone had leaked their travel route. Your Highness, we need to move you to this safe room immediately, Robert said, his hand on his energy pistol. But before they could move, a transmission cut through all their communication channels. Attention Royal Convoy, a rough voice announced. We have disabled your ships. We have one simple demand. Hand over the princess, and the rest of you may live. You have 10 minutes to comply, or we start destroying your ships one by one. The alien guards immediately formed a protective circle around Emma, their weapons ready. Jack noticed they were using standard Empire formation, effective against conventional attacks, but possibly useless in this situation. Captain, what's our status on backup? Emma asked, maintaining her royal composure despite the danger. The nearest patrol is 40 minutes away, Your Highness, Robert replied, his voice tight with tension. Our distress signal is being blocked. Jack watched as the alien guards discussed various scenarios, all involving complex tactical maneuvers and technological solutions. But he saw something they didn't. One of the rebel ships was positioned slightly off from the others, creating a tiny blind spot in their coverage. Your Highness, Jack spoke up, causing everyone to turn toward him. Those aren't regular rebels. Look at their ship positioning. It's too perfect. And the way they disabled our systems suggests they have inside knowledge. Robert frowned. What would a human know about space combat tactics? Enough to notice that they're wearing suicide vests. Jack replied calmly, pointing to the video feed showing the rebels on their ships. Your standard protocols won't work here. They're prepared to die, which means they won't respond to normal deterrence. Emma studied the human carefully. Unlike her guards, who were all discussing probabilities and protocols, Jack seemed focused on the rebels themselves. What are you suggesting, Advisor Stone? They expect us to either surrender or try a technological solution, Jack explained. They're not prepared for a physical breach. I can reach their command ship through that maintenance shaft. He pointed to a small access point that the rebels had overlooked. Impossible, Robert declared. The radiation levels in that shaft would kill anyone without proper protection, and even if you reached their ship, their security systems would detect you immediately. Jack smiled slightly. That's why it'll work. They believe the same thing you do, that it's impossible. They won't be watching for it. And what exactly do you plan to do if you reach their ship? Emma asked, genuinely curious now. Create enough chaos to buy us time until backup arrives, Jack replied. Sometimes the best solution isn't the most advanced one. The guards looked at each other uncertainly. Their training hadn't prepared them for this kind of situation. Everything in their tactical handbook required either superior technology or overwhelming force, neither of which they had right now. "Your Highness, you can't seriously be considering this," Robert protested. "He'll be killed, and then we'll be short one advisor when we need to plan a proper response." Emma looked at the timer displaying on their main screen. 7 minutes left. Her father's words came back to her. Sometimes the old ways survive because they work. She had thought he was talking about empire traditions, but maybe there was another meaning. "How will you handle the radiation?" she asked Jack. Jack pulled out a small medical kit from his uniform. Old Earth technology. Anti-radiation shots. Not as good as your protective suits, but enough to keep me alive for about 30 minutes. More than I need. "This is highly irregular, Your Highness," Robert said stiffly. "Our tactical simulations suggest we should wait for the backup patrol while negotiating with the rebels." "And how many simulations have you run against suicide troops?" Jack asked quietly. The silence that followed was answer enough. Emma stood up, her royal training taking over. "Advisor Stone, I'm giving you direct authorization to proceed with your plan. Captain Robert, you will provide any assistance he requires." Jack nodded and immediately began preparing. He stripped off his outer uniform, leaving him in a black undersuit that would let him move more quietly. The alien guards watched with a mixture of curiosity and doubt as he injected himself with the radiation medication. "Your Highness," Jack said as he checked his simple pistol, "if this works, things are going to get chaotic very quickly. No matter what happens, stay with your guards and be ready to move when I give the signal." "And what signal would that be?" Emma asked. "Trust me, you'll know it when you see it," Jack replied with a slight smile. He turned to Robert. "Captain, I need you to be ready to restart the engines on my mark. They'll have people watching the main engine room, but I'm betting they're not monitoring the auxiliary control systems." Robert looked like he wanted to argue, but Emma's presence kept him professional. "Understood, Advisor Stone." As Jack prepared to enter the maintenance shaft, Emma called out to him. "Why are you doing this? These aren't your people. This isn't your fight." Jack paused, his hand on the access panel. "With respect, Your Highness, I'm a soldier. Protecting people is my fight, no matter where they're from." With that, he opened the panel and disappeared into the shaft. The remaining guards immediately began discussing backup plans, but Emma kept her eyes on the spot where Jack had vanished. For the first time in her life, she wondered if perhaps her people had been wrong about humans. Their technology might be behind, but there was something about their spirit that she was beginning to understand. The timer continued to count down as they waited, each second feeling like an eternity. Emma found herself hoping that this human, whom she had dismissed so easily before, would prove her wrong about everything she thought she knew about his species. The maintenance shaft was barely wide enough for Jack to crawl through. His undersuit was already soaked with sweat, partly from the heat and partly from the anti-radiation medication coursing through his system. Every few meters, he checked his old-fashioned wrist timer. 25 minutes of radiation protection left. The rebels' deadline was even shorter. Through his earpiece, he could hear them getting impatient. Their leader's voice crackled through the channel again. 5 minutes left. "Princess, your guards can't protect you forever." Jack kept moving, using his elbows to pull himself forward. The shaft's metal walls were hot to the touch, and occasional bursts of steam forced him to hold his breath. He smiled grimly, thinking about how the rebels' advanced sensors would never expect anyone to be crazy enough to travel this way. Back in the main ship, Princess Emma watched the tactical display with growing concern. The rebel ships had drawn even closer, their weapons ready to fire. Captain Robert and his guards were still discussing complex battle strategies, but she found her thoughts returning to the human making his way through the radioactive shaft. "Your Highness," Robert said, interrupting her thoughts, "we should consider their demands. We can't risk." A loud alarm cut him off. One of the guard's screens showed a critical warning. "Captain, they're powering up their main weapons." The rebel leader's voice boomed through their systems again. 4 minutes now. Princess, perhaps we should give you a demonstration of how serious we are. A bright beam shot out from one of their ships, slicing through the outer hull of Emma's convoy's smallest support vessel. 30 crew members on that ship, Robert reported, his face grim. They've sealed the breach, but another hit like that. Emma stood tall, her royal training helping her maintain composure. We are not surrendering. Those are my people out there, and I won't abandon them. She glanced at the maintenance shaft access point. We just need to buy more time. Meanwhile, Jack had reached a junction in the shaft. According to the ship's old maintenance diagrams he'd memorized, going left would take him to the rebel command ship's outer hull. But the sound of machinery ahead caught his attention. He paused, listening carefully. The rebels had positioned someone in the maintenance system, probably as a precaution against exactly what he was trying to do. Jack could hear them moving, their heavy boots clanking against the metal floor. He looked at his timer again. 20 minutes of radiation protection remaining. Making a quick decision, Jack removed a small mirror from his medical kit. He carefully positioned it around the corner, using it to peek into the junction. One guard, heavily armed but looking bored. They clearly didn't expect anyone to actually come this way. Jack took a deep breath, remembering his training from Earth's special forces. The rebels had better weapons, better armor, and better technology. But sometimes, the old ways worked best. He deliberately knocked his boot against the shaft wall. The sound echoed through the metal tunnel. "Who's there?" The rebel guard called out, raising their weapon. Jack knocked again, this time from a slightly different spot. The guard moved closer, trying to pinpoint the sound. When the guard was directly below his position, Jack dropped down from the shaft. Before the rebel could react, Jack had them in a chokehold. Another primitive technique the Empire's forces had abandoned centuries ago in favor of technology. Within seconds, the guard was unconscious. Jack quickly dragged the rebel into a side shaft and took their communication device. Through it, he could hear the others giving status updates. 3 minutes remained until their deadline. All sections secured. One voice reported. No sign of any rescue attempt. They're trapped. Jack allowed himself a small smile as he continued toward the command ship. The rebels had secured all the normal attack routes, but they hadn't counted on someone taking the dangerous path. In the Princess's ship, tension was reaching its peak. Robert's guards had taken defensive positions around Emma, their energy weapons charged. Through the view screen, they could see more rebel ships moving into attack positions. 2 minutes remaining, the rebel leader announced. Are you ready to die for your princess, guards? Or will you make the wise choice? Emma watched another support ship take damage, her hands clenched into fists. She wished she could tell her people help was coming, but she couldn't risk the rebels intercepting any messages about Jack's mission. "Captain," one of the guards called out, "their command ship is moving closer. They're preparing to board us." Robert raised his weapon. "Then we fight. For the Empire." Just then, a small light began blinking on their tactical display. Someone had accessed the rebel command ship's outer hull maintenance hatch. Emma felt her heart race. Jack had made it. The rebel leader's voice came through again, but this time he sounded distracted. 1 minute left, Princess. What is your answer? Through the rebel's communication device, Jack could hear the confusion starting to spread. He had managed to place small devices he'd brought from Earth, simple magnetic disruptors, on key points of their ship's hull. They weren't powerful enough to cause real damage, but they were playing havoc with the rebels' sensitive equipment. "Sir, we're getting strange readings," one rebel reported. "Our internal sensors are malfunctioning." "Fix it," the leader snapped. "We can't lose control now." 30 seconds, Princess. Jack reached the final access point. Beyond this door was the rebel ship's main corridor. He checked his timer. 15 minutes of radiation protection left. More than enough time. He pulled out his pistol. a simple projectile weapon that the rebels would consider ancient. But unlike their energy weapons, it wouldn't be affected by his disruptors. 10 seconds, the rebel leader shouted. 9, 8. Jack took a deep breath and remembered why he had joined the Empire's forces as an advisor. Not for glory or advancement, but because he believed that people needed protection, no matter what planet they came from. 5, 4. He pressed the button to open the access door. 3, 2. The door slid open, and Jack stepped through, his old-fashioned weapon raised. The rebels spun around, completely shocked to see a human standing in their command center. 1. The leader said, then froze as he realized they had a bigger problem than the countdown. Back in the princess's ship, Emma and her guards watched in amazement as chaos erupted on their tactical display. The rebel command ship systems were going haywire, their perfect formation falling apart as confusion spread through their ranks. "How did a human?" Robert whispered, watching the display in disbelief. Emma felt a smile spread across her face. Perhaps her father had been wiser than she'd realized when he insisted on having the human advisor. Sometimes the best solutions weren't the most advanced ones. They were the ones your enemies would never expect. The rebel command center erupted into chaos as Jack moved swiftly through the door. His entrance had caught them completely off guard. Their weapons were pointed at their screens, not at the maintenance access behind them. In the crucial first seconds, he had the advantage of surprise. "Don't move," Jack commanded, his voice firm and steady despite the radiation medicine making his head spin. The rebels turned to face him, their expressions a mixture of shock and confusion at seeing a human aboard their ship. The rebel leader recovered first, reaching for his advanced energy rifle. "Kill him," he shouted, but Jack was already moving. He dove behind a control panel as energy beams lit up the room. Unlike the rebels' weapons, his old-style pistol wasn't connected to any computer systems. It just worked. 2 quick shots rang out. The first hit the main power relay for their weapons, sending sparks flying. The second struck the leader's rifle, knocking it from his hands. The rebels stared in disbelief. Their personal shields were designed to stop energy weapons, not physical bullets. "Primitive weapons," one rebel spat, reaching for a backup gun. "You dare." Jack didn't let him finish. He threw one of his magnetic disruptors directly at the rebel's chest piece. The small device stuck to the advanced armor and immediately began interfering with its systems. The rebel's shield flickered and died, along with half the electronics in his suit. On the princess's ship, Emma and her guards watched the tactical display with amazement. The rebel ship's perfect formation was falling apart as their command center descended into disarray. Captain Robert was already taking advantage of the confusion, powering up their auxiliary systems. "Your Highness," Robert reported, "their coordination is breaking down. Whatever Advisor Stone is doing, it's working." Back on the rebel ship, Jack was dealing with the remaining guards. His radiation timer showed 12 minutes left. He needed to end this quickly. 3 rebels charged at him, thinking to overwhelm him with numbers. But Jack had trained in Earth's gravity, much stronger than the artificial gravity they were used to. He met their charge head-on. The first rebel swung a high-tech stun baton, but Jack caught his arm and used the rebel's own momentum to throw him into his companions. They crashed together, their automated armor systems tangling as they tried to recover. Jack followed up with quick strikes to vulnerable joints, another primitive technique that the Empire had forgotten in favor of technology. "Stop," the rebel leader shouted, pulling out a detonator. "One more move and I'd blow all our ships." Jack froze, assessing the situation. The leader's hand was shaking, not from fear, but from rage. Here was a human, supposedly inferior, defeating his elite troops with nothing but outdated weapons and basic combat skills. "You think you're clever, human," the leader snarled. "Your primitive tricks won't save the princess. Even if you kill us all, there are more rebels waiting. The Empire will fall." Jack noticed something the leader hadn't. The magnetic disruptors had affected more systems than just their weapons. including the safety protocols on their suicide vests. The rebels were so dependent on their technology that they hadn't even realized their own bombs were now useless. "You're right about one thing," Jack said calmly, lowering his pistol. "My tricks won't save the princess." He took a step forward. "But I'm not just here to save her. I'm here to save you too." The leader laughed harshly. "Save us? We don't need saving from a primitive human." "Look at your vest controls," Jack suggested. The leader glanced down, and his face went pale. All the status lights were dark. "Those magnetic disruptors don't just affect weapons. They interrupt all complex electronic systems. Your bombs haven't worked for the past 5 minutes." The other rebels quickly checked their own vests, panic spreading across their faces. Their entire plan had relied on the threat of mutual destruction. Without it, they were just outnumbered rebels facing the Empire's forces. "Impossible," the leader whispered. "Our systems are perfect. They can't be defeated by simple magnets." "That's your problem," Jack said, taking another step forward. "You think advanced always means better. Sometimes the simple solution is the right one." Through his earpiece, he could hear Princess Emma's voice. "Advisor Stone, our engines are back online. The backup patrol will be here in 10 minutes." The rebel leader must have heard similar news through his own communications, because his face twisted with fury. He threw away the useless detonator and pulled out a hidden knife. "Another primitive weapon. Then I'll kill you the old way." He lunged at Jack, blade flashing. But Jack had spent years training in hand-to-hand combat, something the Empire's forces rarely practiced anymore. He deflected the leader's wild swing and countered with a precise strike to the neck. Not enough to kill, just to stun. The leader dropped like a stone. The remaining rebels, seeing their leader fall, finally lost their nerve. They dropped their weapons, raising their hands in surrender. Jack quickly secured the prisoners, using simple rope from his kit rather than electronic restraints. His timer showed 8 minutes of radiation protection remaining. Cutting it close, but he'd make it. He moved to the ship's control panel and began shutting down their weapons. "This is Advisor Stone," he transmitted to the princess's ship. "Command center is secured. You can begin evacuation of the damaged support vessels." Emma's voice came back, filled with relief and something else: respect. "Well done, Advisor. I believe we all owe you an apology for our assumptions about human capabilities." Jack allowed himself a small smile as he worked. "No apologies needed, Your Highness. Just doing my job." Through the ship's windows, he could see the backup patrol finally arriving, their ships surrounding the rebel fleet. The surviving rebels were being rounded up, their advanced weapons and armor useless against the simple precautions Jack had taken. The radiation timer on his wrist beeped a 5-minute warning. Jack's vision was starting to blur. He needed medical attention soon. But as he looked at the secured rebel leader and thought of the lives he'd saved, he knew it had been worth the risk. Princess Emma's ship docked with the rebel vessel, and he could hear boots approaching the command center. Soon, Empire guards would take control, and everything would return to normal. But something had changed today, not just in how the aliens viewed humans, but in how they viewed themselves. Sometimes the most powerful weapon wasn't the most advanced technology, but the willingness to take risks that others thought impossible. Today, a single human with outdated equipment had succeeded where an entire squad of elite alien guards had hesitated. It wasn't about the tools. It was about the spirit behind them. The medical bay of Princess Emma's ship hummed with activity as doctors treated the radiation exposure Jack had suffered during his rescue mission. He lay on the examination table, fighting waves of nausea as the advanced alien medical equipment worked to reverse the damage. The doctors had been shocked when they saw his radiation readings. No one had survived such levels in decades, not since the Empire had developed proper protection suits. Emma stood nearby, watching the treatment with concern. The human advisor had saved not just her life, but the lives of everyone in her convoy. Yet he had used such simple tools to do it. The rebel leader's words kept playing in her mind. Primitive weapons. But those primitive weapons had succeeded where all their advanced technology had failed. The radiation damage is severe, the head doctor reported, checking the medical screens. But he'll recover. Though I must say, those Earth radiation medications he used, they're incredibly crude. It's amazing they worked at all. They worked because they had to, Jack said weakly from the table. Sometimes that's all you need. Emma moved closer to his bed. The doctors had wanted her to leave, saying it wasn't proper for a princess to visit the medical bay. But she had insisted. She needed to understand something. Advisor Stone, why did you take such a risk? The chances of survival were. Sometimes you can't think about the chances, Jack interrupted, his voice growing stronger. Sometimes you just have to act. But why? Emma pressed. You knew the radiation could kill you. You knew you were outnumbered. All our tactical analysis said it was impossible. Jack was quiet for a moment, looking at the ceiling. Then he spoke softly. 7 years ago, on Earth, there was a terrorist attack. They took over a school, had bombs, just like your rebels today. Everyone said it was impossible to save the children without massive casualties. Emma listened intently as Jack continued. My wife was a teacher there. My daughter was in her class. The authorities wanted to negotiate, to find the perfect solution. They waited too long. He closed his eyes. I was serving overseas when it happened. By the time I got home, they were gone. The medical bay fell silent. Even the doctors stopped their work, listening to the human story. After that, Jack said, opening his eyes again, I promised myself I would never wait for the perfect solution when lives were at stake. Sometimes you have to act, even when everyone says it's impossible, especially then. Emma felt something wet on her cheek and realized she was crying. Something a princess was never supposed to do in public. But for once, she didn't care about protocol. That's why you joined the Empire's forces, to prevent something like that from happening again. Jack nodded. Your father understood. That's why he wanted human advisors. He saw that the Empire was becoming too dependent on technology, too focused on finding perfect solutions. Sometimes the best answer isn't the most advanced one. One of the doctors spoke up, his voice thoughtful. The rebels' plan counted on us following our standard procedures. They knew exactly how we would react, because we always react the same way. But they didn't count on human unpredictability. Emma finished. She was beginning to understand why her father had been so insistent on bringing humans into the Empire's military structure. Captain Robert entered the medical bay, his usual perfect posture slightly relaxed. Your Highness, we've finished questioning the rebel leader. He's revealed something disturbing. Emma turned to face him. What is it, Captain? The rebels have more cells, just as they claimed. But what's worse is how they've been operating. They've been using our own tactical protocols against us. They know exactly how we'll respond to any situation because we always follow the same procedures. Then we need to change, Emma said firmly. We need to learn to be more adaptable. Jack tried to sit up, but the doctors quickly pushed him back down. Your Highness, he said, humans aren't better than your people. We're just different. We've had to learn different ways to solve problems because we didn't have advanced technology to rely on. Emma looked around the medical bay, seeing the mix of human and alien approach right there. The doctors were using their advanced equipment to heal Jack, but it was his simple Earth medications that had kept him alive long enough to reach them. Captain, she said, making a decision, I want you to begin incorporating human tactical training into our security forces immediately. Not to replace our methods, but to complement them. Robert nodded, and Emma saw something new in his eyes when he looked at Jack. Respect. Already done, Your Highness. After what I saw today, I've ordered all our guards to begin studying Earth military history and combat techniques. Jack managed a small smile. Just don't forget your own strengths, Captain. The key isn't to abandon technology. It's to know when to use it and when to try something else. A young guard entered the medical bay, looking excited. Your Highness, the news of Advisor Stone's rescue is spread through the Empire's communication networks. The public is calling it a turning point in human-empire relations. Emma wasn't surprised. Her people loved stories of bravery and sacrifice, and Jack's actions had shattered countless prejudices about human capabilities. But more importantly, it had shown them a different way of thinking about problems. "We've gotten so used to having the most advanced solution," she said thoughtfully, "that we forgot sometimes the simplest answer is the right one. Courage, sacrifice, quick thinking. These things matter more than having the best technology." "These are lessons we need to remember," Robert added. "The rebels won't be the last threat we face. We need to be ready for anything." Jack finally managed to sit up, despite the doctor's protests. "Then let me teach you. Not just about human tactics, but about human thinking. About looking at problems from different angles, and not always seeking the perfect solution." Emma looked at the human advisor, the man who had risked everything to save her and her people, not because of duty or protocol, but because he couldn't stand by and watch others suffer. She thought of her father's wisdom in bringing humans into the Empire, and she knew this was just the beginning of a much bigger change. 3 months after the rebel attack, the Great Hall of the Imperial Palace was filled with both aliens and humans. Princess Emma stood on the central platform, her silver scales gleaming under the ceremonial lights. The crowd fell silent as she raised her hand to speak. "Today marks a new chapter in the history of our empire," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. "For too long, we believed that advancement meant relying solely on technology. We forgot that true strength comes from combining the best of all approaches." In the front row, Jack stood in his new uniform, one that combined both human and Empire design elements. He had fully recovered from the radiation exposure, though the doctors still monitored him regularly. They were fascinated by how the human body had adapted to survive such conditions. "The recent rebel attacks taught us an important lesson," Emma continued. "Our enemies used our own predictability against us. They knew exactly how we would react because we have become too rigid, too dependent on our protocols and advanced systems." Captain Robert, standing beside Jack, nodded in agreement. The past 3 months had seen dramatic changes in how the Empire's forces operated. Human instructors had been brought in to teach their methods, while Empire technology experts worked to blend the best of both approaches. "But one human showed us a different way," Emma said, looking directly at Jack. "He showed us that courage, creativity, and the willingness to take calculated risks are just as important as having the most advanced weapons. Today, we honor not just his bravery, but the beginning of a true partnership between humans and the Empire." The hall erupted in applause. Jack noticed something interesting about the crowd. The Empire citizens were no longer segregated from the humans. They stood mixed together, talking and sharing ideas. It was exactly what Emma had been working towards. "As my first act under the new military reforms," Emma announced, "I am creating a joint human-empire defense force. This force will combine our technological advantages with human tactical thinking and adaptability, and I can think of no better person to lead this initiative than the man who proved it could work." She gestured for Jack to join her on the platform. He walked up, remembering how just 3 months ago, many in this room would have dismissed him as a primitive advisor. Now they watched him with respect. "Advisor Stone," Emma said formally, "will you accept this position and help lead us into a new era?" Jack stepped forward. "I would be honored, Your Highness, but I have one condition." A murmur ran through the crowd. No one made conditions to the royal family. But Emma smiled and nodded for him to continue. "The new force must be truly equal," Jack said, his voice carrying clearly. "Not humans learning to be like the Empire, or the Empire trying to be like humans, but both sides learning from each other, combining our strengths to create something new." "Agreed," Emma replied without hesitation. "That has always been my intention." She turned back to the crowd. "Let this be the first of many changes. We will no longer judge methods as primitive or advanced, but by their effectiveness. We will learn from each other, grow together, and face any challenge united. The celebration continued late into the night. Jack watched as human soldiers taught Empire guards simple hand-to-hand combat techniques, while Empire scientists showed humans how to integrate their tactical thinking with advanced technology. It was exactly the kind of exchange he had hoped to see. "Quite a change from when I first arrived," Robert said, joining Jack at his observation point. "I remember thinking you were a liability. Now, I can't imagine our forces without human insight." Jack smiled. "And I can't imagine going back to Earth's limited technology. We're stronger together than apart." Across the room, Emma was deep in conversation with a mixed group of human and Empire military strategists. They were already planning joint training exercises, finding ways to combine Earth's combat experience with Empire technology. "The rebels are still out there," Robert said quietly. "Our intelligence suggests they're regrouping, trying to find new ways to attack us." "Let them try," Jack replied confidently. "They won't be facing the same Empire anymore. We're not predictable now. They can't know if they'll face advanced technology or basic tactics, and that uncertainty is our greatest strength." A young human soldier approached them, looking nervous. "Sir, we've finished analyzing the rebel leader's interrogation data. There's something you should see." Jack followed the soldier to a nearby computer terminal. The screen showed a complex network of rebel cells, spread throughout the Empire. But what caught his attention was the pattern. They had been specifically targeting locations where the Empire's forces were most rigidly structured. "They'd been studying us for years," Robert said, looking over Jack's shoulder, "using our own procedures against us. Then we'll give them something new to study," Jack replied. He turned to Emma, who had joined them at the terminal. "Your Highness, I think it's time to show them what humans and the Empire can do together." Emma nodded, her expression determined. "Agreed. Captain Robert, begin implementing the new joint training programs immediately. I want every unit to have both human and Empire members, learning from each other." "And the rebels?" Robert asked. "We'll find them," Jack said firmly. "Not with just technology, and not with just human tactics, but with both working together in ways they'll never expect." As the celebration continued around them, Jack looked at the changes already taking place. Humans and aliens working together, sharing knowledge and skills, breaking down the barriers that had kept them apart. It wasn't just about military strength anymore. It was about creating a better future for both species. "You know," Emma said softly, joining him at his observation point, "my father would be proud to see this. He always said the Empire needed to change to grow. He saw the potential in human partnership long before any of us." Jack nodded. Change isn't always about advancing technology. Sometimes it's about remembering older truths while embracing new ideas. And sometimes, Emma added with a smile, it takes one person willing to crawl through a radioactive maintenance shaft to show everyone a better way. The celebration continued, but it was more than just a party now. It was the beginning of something new. A future where humans and the Empire faced their challenges together, each bringing their own strengths to create something greater than either could achieve alone. And it had all started because one human soldier dared to try the impossible.